Now we're live. All right. Give a few minutes for people to join in. I know last time I did it, a lot of people emailed me later saying they had um caught up or watched it on the catch up instead of watching it live. So it seems to be
That's what I'm finding too.
used. Yeah.
I've uh,
Hi, Robin. Thanks for joining. Just giving a couple minutes for people to join us and then we'll get started here. Dan, I think we'll start at like 11:02-ish.
perfect.
I don't want to have a long, quiet space at the beginning
No, we should just
before.
get going. We can just get going.
Okay, so I'll just jump in with my intro and then I'll turn it over to you. For this episode of Cool People on Substack, Diane has agreed to share her journey in developing a tone and voice for Substack that would resonate with an audience. Diane is a veteran journalist and content editor. On her Substack Musings of a Storyteller, she tackles subjects that don't easily fit into a category. This caused her to rethink her approach to building an audience that will enjoy her various topics, both on Substack and across social media. She will share her strategy and the insights she has discovered. But before we get into strategy and insights and all that, Diane, could you share with us your original idea behind Musings of a Storyteller and how it has evolved since you started in 2023?
Hey, thank you for having me today. I hope I'm a cool person at my old age. Um, I am, and thank you for the question. It's funny. My goal was to write a book. And I was working with an editor, and she said, you can't get a book deal these days without an audience. So, you should get on Substack and start writing. So now I'm looking at this blank screen, and I fell back to what I talk about naturally, which is either how to write. Um, I would work for high tech companies, and as head of their content, their chief content or chief storyteller of these different high tech companies, I was constantly training engineers or non writers on how to create content that would engage. I also worked with a group of people. Joe Polizzi was one of the original founders of the Content Marketing Institute, and he'd left there and he'd written a book called The Tilt. And they were building they were working on a crowdsourced book. So all of this stuff is going on at the same time. This crowdsourced book was on for content entrepreneurs. And I realized I really wasn't a content entrepreneur up until that point because I was always working in content for other people. Now I'm staring at this blank page trying to figure out what I'm going to do. So I was some of the pieces that I was contributing to the book, I put them on my Substack because it was easy. It was something near and dear to me and I could get it out there. Um, I was writing about brand publishing for high tech companies, what it entails and all this sort of stuff. And then I found that about, I don't know, 8 to 10 weeks into doing this, I really didn't care. I mean, it just wasn't my passion. And if it's not my passion, no one else is going to be really interested in it either. So it started to evolve from there. I was working on the book I'm working on is about an ancestral relative who had was crucial in the 1880s in labor reform. She was a labor reform activist. She became the head of a national group called the Knights of Labor. Um, as I was digging into her stories, I couldn't believe I was falling in love with this character, this woman, the ancestral relative. And she was becoming more of a cornerstone in my writing. And I found myself really happy to write about sort of the mundane things that happen in life and trying to put a positive spin on it. There was already enough negative out there on Substack. I'm a news junkie, so I'm already reading about and I did thought no, none of us need anymore, you know,
Yeah.
you know, cat on a screen screaming information. We needed things that would light, things that gave us hope. And this is where I am. This is where I'm centered. Um, the and so anyway, I just started writing on a number of different topics. And what would happen is like Sunday or Monday, and I've gotten on a habit now of writing every Friday, publishing every Friday. And I've been keeping it up because I want it to be a habit. So I made two resolutions this year, which was to write an essay every week, as well as to read a book every week. You can't write a book without being well read. And a lot of my writing over the last 30, 40 years of my career was, reading Wired magazine, reading B2B stuff that I don't care about. And by the way, I was very much into AI. So I had some Gen AI stories early on too, how to use it for the home, how to use it for small businesses, and I was thinking about maybe I'll assemble that as a book. But as I watch the reaction by writers, especially those on Substack to AI, I've thought, you know what, I don't want to link my name. Now I use it. I use it not to generate content. I use it for an analysis. And I'm happy to discuss that with anybody on how I do it and what I do. Um, but I decided I'm not going to write a book on that subject. That's just not something I'm trying to build an audience, not irritate one. So yeah, anyway, that's where I'm at today. So that's sort of music of a storyteller is like my story. It's all over the place, right? But I try and circle back and come up with an ending that I hope is going to give you a little bit of hope, make you think a little bit differently, offer that firsthand experience and sort of weave it in as a parade.
Yeah, because with musings of a storyteller, I've noticed you have your stories on AI that you did. I think that was beginning of last year, or maybe middle of last year. You have the storytelling of like the high tech storytelling, and then you have life deconstructed and stories from the past. So it's quite a range of topics. So how have you managed to find an audience while kind of dabbling in a little bit of this and a little bit of that, kind of all over the map?
Well, the early pieces, the brand storytelling, again, because I really wasn't, I pushed it out and it helped me when I was editing this book because I was actually the editor of that book as well, on the Content Entrepreneur. Um, and I wrote 3 chapters in that book. So all of that was the mindset, so that was pretty easy. You helped me figure out, like, we'll call this, brand storytelling. And we've created those segments on the site. And over time, I'm just deprecating them. The Gen AI pieces there's 6 pieces, and I think they're good. I mean, I think there's some really great advice in there. Um, and I just, like I said, it wasn't maintaining my interest. Joe Plissy talks about the tilt being, what is the passion that your audience is feeling, and how do you tap into that passion? What is their tilt and what is your tilt? And then those two have to align, right? So if my passion is writing about herbs like you do, then that passion has to come out so that it really can interest those who are passionate about that subject as well.
Right.
And I was realizing I was having a tough time finding my tilt because a lot of different subjects interest me. And I guess really got into just like digging into the mayhem and the mundane and making it make sense and adding a little bit of humor to it. So the
Yeah.
topics are varied, but I think the audiences are people who are you know, they tend to be a little bit older, a little more circumspect. They're also they need a respite from all of the negativity. Um, and I think it just offers a slightly different point of view that can be, you know,
Yeah.
engaging and fun.
Yeah.
I don't know, you read it.
Yeah. Recently you've had a lot of neat posts go out. Different I love the way you headline your posts and things. I find them very like they're not clickbait, but they kind of catch your attention. And then when you read through it, it's not always like um it's not a descriptive mundane title for the for the post. It's more it's quippy, but it also is related to the post. Like it's not quippy and off topic, which I've had clients have issues with before. But like for example, one of the ones you had go out recently was our kids don't want them. And you had a quite a reaction to that one. And it wasn't, and maybe it was partly because of don't want what is she talking about?
Yeah.
But can you talk a little bit about what you did with that post and how it gained kind of viral attention on a Substack level, which is not an Instagram level, but yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the audiences I've been tapping into, especially with writing about Leonora or writing about my grandmother. Again, these are all firsthand experiences, right? So it's my firsthand experiences. So by default, when you're writing about family, there's an interest by genealogists and family historians to gravitate to that type of writing. Um, and I really try and throw my stuff. Lisa McGuire was talking about microhistory. So not just talking about my grandmother, but my grandmother in 1920. What was going on around that? Why was she was a we I termed her the trad wife, and she was her the traditional wife in the 1930s. If you had any money, which she did, was to be really into volunteerism and philanthropy. And I'm telling you, it was a full time job for her. So while on the census it said homemaker, in reality, she's out there building the wing for a hospital with, and she's running it. And these women would gather at each other's homes. And anyway, part of that story is I was in my closet one day and I came across this bag. I knew I had it in there, but I hadn't really looked at them. And they were my grandmother's teacups. And it's like, what am I going to do with these teacups? They're not my style. I have no bone china anywhere. I mean, it's like chipped, this is my mug, my signature mug. It's number 3. There are no more left on eBay. My husband broke one, then he broke the next one. Um, this is it. I like bubble wrap it. I wash it myself. I put it away. I think it's the only mug we were using that didn't have like the name of a company emblazoned on it or wasn't chipped or
Yeah.
something. So also I got these delicate little teacups of my grandmother's, and I was looking at the stamps on the bottom, and that's where the story was coming out. It was like, what am I going to do with this? And my kids don't want them. And then I broadened it to our kids don't want him. And I'm telling you, it resonated. Everybody was chiming in, going, yeah, I've got all these things in my house. I've collected them. They were my mother's. They were my grandmother's. They came from Ireland. They came from wherever. And nobody wants them. And, there's so much talk about, is this the last year where we have the archives of things? I mean, when you get into fast fashion and everything being so cheaply made, people aren't, there isn't that homespun feeling anymore around the
Yeah.
chair that was made by Uncle Wilbur, out of maple that he chopped down himself. Where there's these, no, we went to Target and we bought it, with coupons. And,
Yeah.
so it's easy to throw these things out. And I think that's what I was grappling with on that story. And so yeah, it was really interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, I think one of the things that I've also realized is that not every story is going to be of interest to everyone. And I think that's something we can also recognize, especially if we're all signing up for everybody's Substack. I have a Substack folder and there's 1,200 emails
Oh,
in my Substack folder that need to be read. And I know I'm reading them, but I'm not necessarily reading them when they're coming in. I'm reading them because I know the writers, and I'm reading them as they're writing it, as they're putting it out,
Yeah.
or I'm reading it through notes or what have you. So um,
Yeah.
I re- I'm really honored that my open rate is as high as it is. It's about 40%. It was 46. It'll fluctuate in that range. But that makes me feel good that I think those people are my hardcore readers that go, I like Diane's style. It's a little bit different. Um, Others are probably opening it because the headline is interesting. But another group are those that I target those stories. Like that was a really great Substack opportunity because those people that's where the genealogists and the historians are. And then a couple of them asked me to do lives with them, and that just took off. So that was really cool. I have other stories that I think are going to resonate more on the different social channels. So, like Facebook provides an opportunity. It tends to be people when I was living, that I grew up with, or they know me personally. And, back, 15 years ago, we were using or Facebook as a way to sort of keep in touch with friends, right? I'd sort of fallen away from that, but I'm finding that this is a good opportunity to get back in there with a given story. And I write an intro that is very different from what's in the story. I'm writing to that audience as to why they would want to bother to read this. Like, remember the time we were at da 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 da? You know, I thought you'd be interested in this piece that I wrote about such and such. And I'm
So
finding that works.
so you don't just
Be-
share everything to every social media platform. You're kind of like choosing certain articles
I
that you think
target.
will resonate with specific. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm finding, because first of all, I don't have time. I mean, I've done a number of pieces on workplace reform, and I will put those on LinkedIn, knowing that a lot of employers and workplace reform don't really care about that. But the people I worked with might. And, I'll make something quippy like, if you ever think about the fact that we don't have to bargain with anybody to have like H HVAC, air conditioning and heating in a building. Well, you might want to thank my relative for that, that these basic human
Yeah,
needs
yeah.
are covered. So, and I did one on workplace goodbyes. You lose your job and you have to say goodbye to people, and companies spend so much time reinforcing these relationships, team building, and all that sort of stuff. That was one that really resonated on
Mhm.
LinkedIn, because that's, we understand that. We understand that people get laid off, you lose a friend, somebody you turn to every single day. That was that friendly face. You've probably shared more intimate details with these strangers that you may or may not ever see again. And I think one might be
Yeah.
on live right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point because sometimes I think like I always tell people, at least share what you're doing to notes, right? Because you're on Substack, make the most of the Substack platform. But using external social media can sometimes be um, difficult in that you don't know uh, who's there and if they're actually interested in what you're writing about on Substack. So I like what you're saying about kind of, posting some things to Facebook and some things to LinkedIn. And do you kind of make a habit of sharing everything to notes, or do you kind of pick and choose there? Like, do you have specific topics that resonate better on Substack specifically?
Everything goes on Substack.
Okay.
That everything goes on Substack, and I'm getting better about sharing a quote from within it, using the quote format and sending that out. I mean, it's taken me a while to really get all the technical ways of using it and pushing it out. I mean, I'm busy. I literally, I do not know how some of these folks, and Robin's online, you guys, between your lives and you're responding to everybody and writing these newsletters that are 100 miles long, I don't know how you're doing it. I know that a given um some of the pieces that I've been writing about Leonora, um as I'm finding the research, it'll give me an idea for an essay, and I'll do it. I could easily spend 3 full day in a week, right? 3 full
Yeah.
days writing. Then I'm formatting it. I do my voiceover. I'm looking for images, and eh, on Fridays the essay is done, and I still spend 6 hours doing all this little, I'm reading again. When I do it live, that's when I find all the typos. Or not the live, when I do the voiceover, that's when you find, this isn't really clear. And I have other people reading it beforehand. And it just
Yeah.
shows you a good piece that you're really proud of is probably being iterated on 6, 7 times. Um, so yeah. And your question was, so I always put all of those out on notes, and I'm trying to get better about posting almost daily on notes. One of the things I did on Friday was posted an article I did a year ago on back to school supplies. This is like a pet passion of mine. I just don't think that any other profession has to, you know, bear the expense of making sure that their job is engaging, right? You would
Yeah.
expense it and get it reimbursed, not teachers. So there are Donors Choose, the Amazon wish list, and then a company called Impacts, which is out of Minnesota. There are different, more cost efficient ways of getting school supplies. Parents can do that. So I wrote about that. But then classroom supplies, which is what falls on the shoulders of teachers, this was supposed to help them. So I thought, all right, I'll give myself a little break. I'll dust this thing off from a year ago, and I'll put it out there. And I had put it in the post, and then I added all this stuff, and I realized that this morning I realized it's too confusing. So we went back and I edited out last year's post. I just have a link to last year's post, but I did the big link. And I just you want to get to the point. And the point is, look, from a year ago, there have been all these new tariffs on everything, which is just skyrocketing
Right.
back to school supplies. And it was getting lost in this, because I was trying to do too many things with it. I was trying to dust off last year's. That was my goal. That my audience doesn't care about that. And that's one of the things you have to constantly be looking at as a writer. Is your audience going to care?
Yeah.
You care. Do they?
Right.
And a lot of times that's what hits the cutting room floor, the things that you realize this is of interest to you. Put it in a drawer and, do something with it at another time, but this isn't the time or place. So
Yeah.
anyway,
That's a good point. Yeah, like it's kind of a mix of us wanting to share what we're doing, but also to reach the audience that we're writing to. And some people can just write to the void and all they want is to express themselves, and it doesn't matter to them how many reads or clicks or whatever that they get. Other people, it matters a lot. And I think most of us are kind of somewhere in the middle there. Like we're not playing the numbers game, but we're also hoping that we're not writing to the void. We have a couple questions that I wanted to bring up from the
good.
scrolling chat here. Um, Mira was asking how you do the quote thing. And Mira, that is where you open up a post that you've already published, select some text, and then hit restack. And it will, like the restack automatically pops up and it will give you a little quote in a colored block that posts really nicely to notes. The other question that she had, which
But
is,
but I'm going to interrupt for a second.
yes,
It's
for sure.
easier to do that on notes from your phone. From the
Okay.
laptop, it's another step. Well, you go for I don't know why there's not a notes link there. It lets you do it for Facebook, for LinkedIn, and then there's a quote.
There
So
is, but it's kind of separate. Like it's a share to notes instead of just, or you're clicking share instead of restack maybe. Because if you hit restack, it automatically goes to notes. If you hit share, it pulls up the bubble and kind of asks where you want to
but
put
if
it.
I do restack, I'm not able to put my thing ahead of it, can I?
Yeah.
See, look at this. We're going to make this a whole learning piece. This is why she's a Substack coach.
And then, but the other part of Mira's question was, how do you voice what you're saying on notes? and even on other social media platforms to reach the audience there. She doesn't find notes very intuitive for using. Um, and we can talk a little bit more about that too. But what are your thoughts on kind of phrasing, like writing your notes so that they'll reach the audience you're hoping to reach on Substack?
So, um, it's a great question, and it it changes, right, with every topic. Like I said, I try and I there are people I know on Substack, like yourself, that I deal with on that I'm now engaging with on another, and that's another thing. You've got to engage on other people's Substacks, so you
Yeah.
get to know them. You write on theirs, guess what? They typically are gonna write on yours, and then when you do, you're starting to create a relationship with these people. So when I write my note, I'm not writing into the void. I have a face in mind because I know that person has a following. And so I'm right to that, not necessarily saying, hey, Lisa, or hey, Robin, but I write with a person in mind. And I think as a writer, you have to do that. You think in terms of, who am I talking to? If I'm having a conversation with somebody, why are they going to be interested? And if you think about it, I was having this conversation recently with a client of mine, and he was talking about something, and I said, but don't you speak differently to your wife than you do your children? And he started laughing, and I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, it changes. So sometimes you have to make those points to people, that when you
Yeah.
have a picture of somebody in your mind, you know what will resonate. And so my note might be something silly like, those teacups you got from Aunt Mary, and they're hanging out on your shelf, and you really don't know what to do with it. Yeah, I found myself in the same situation, and that's what this story is about. And then, that was of interest to them. And you can do that every day of the week. And I would really suggest to people that that be like a little exercise to sort of get used to this idea of promoting your story with a different anecdote of something that you think might resonate with some of these people that you're engaging with on, say, Substack on a regular basis.
Yeah. No, that's a really great point. Promoting your posts is really important because, well, Substack gives us a lot of tools to work with. Um, it's not, they're not marketing our posts for us or even our publication for us, especially when we're not bestsellers, which most of us aren't, at least not yet. But one thing that I have noticed, just a tip about the notes, is that using keywords is really important when you're writing a note. And I've noticed that the algorithm will then sort what you're writing into the subcategories that your audience is more likely to hang out in if you use the right keywords in the note that you write. So for example, if you here's an example that I like to use. I came across this while with a client, and someone had written a post, and we were scrolling through. They were a food and drink publication, so we were scrolling through the beverages category, and I came across this note that said, "Here's a little sip of crazy for you." It was sorted into the beverages category, but the post that they were sharing was about Donald Trump. So it should have been in the politics section, but because they used the word sip, because they were being quippy, it was in beverages instead of in politics. So just something to keep in mind with when you're doing notes.
Yeah, and it doesn't really use hashtags the same way as
No,
other, right? So
no, hashtags don't work at all. I think they're trying to be different, which just makes it more confusing for us. But it's using the words in a sentence, right? So,
right. Right.
yeah.
And that's a problem because if you're a writer, a good writer doesn't want to use the same pedestrian words as everybody else. So
Yeah. Yeah.
hopefully
No.
it has a good thesaurus in its background.
It seems to be pretty good. Yeah. Definitely. Like I've scrolled through several subcategories just to kind of see how it sorts and what it's doing, and it seems to be, for the most part, pretty well done that way. So, yeah. Yeah. So, I would love to hear more about what you're doing on Musings of a Storyteller, like coming up. I know you were talking about you're getting more into genealogies and like, or not genealogies yourself, but more with that audience. And do you have any
No,
new and exciting things coming up?
well, there's so many exciting challenges out there. People will be writing about family history and they'll say, like, let's write about all the women in our, and that was something I was really keen on, writing about the strong women in my background. So the other day I did this deep dive on an ancestral relative. He is my great grandfather, my 10x grandfather, right? Which means 10 generations ago. And it turns out he was a German servant as a teen. He ends up marrying an heiress. So it's her that I'm really interested in. He's written up. I want to figure out about her. I mean, she has 11 children. This is a woman whose story needs to be told. And even if I can't find a lot about her, I can write about the period of time. This is the 1630s.
Oh, wow.
1630s.
Yeah.
What would life have been like with 11 children?
Yeah.
So I mean, these are the types of things. And then I put that, like, I bitch and moan about with two kids having to have soccer practice and basketball practice in two different parts in a conference call at the same time. So that's the type of stuff I'll weave together, and she's got to, like, worry about how do you keep 11 mouths alive when, the fire is dwindling down and you don't want little
Mhm.
Tommy to burn himself in the fire. Well, it's little, I can't even imagine. I have
Yeah.
no idea how anybody survived.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the type of writing I'll do. Leonora is coming along really, really well. And my goal is to have a book out about her by the 100th anniversary of her death will be in 5 years, uh,
Okay.
2030. So there's a lot of Leonora. She was a school teacher. And I thought about that this morning as I'm writing about school supplies. I was like, wow, I have a grandmother who was a school teacher. They went to the same school. There's things like that I'm thinking of, how am I going to weave that together? I have an aunt that was a school teacher and she's 103. So she's still alive and she tells me all these little things that happen. When you got married, you were no longer allowed to have a contract. So I will weave
Right.
in that type of history. It's just a throwaway line. Um, I go through a lot of old newspapers. On this day 100 years ago, the headlines were so similar, which is shocking. It was
Yeah.
so shocking how many similarities there are to headlines. So that might be a goofy story that I write. I mean, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
basically, look for something weird and associate,
Yeah.
pull myself into it and pull you into it and make it interesting for all of us to read.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're coming to the end of our time together today, but I always like to ask, what are a couple features or even one on Substack that you really enjoy using? And the second part to that question is, what is something you wish Substack did or did better? So,
Well, first, I like this how they take the notes and it makes it into a nice graphic. And you could change the color. I do that. I figure, is this going to be on purple or will this be an orange one? Or maybe I'll want it on the dark one. Um, what I and the other one I like a lot is this voiceover. And I am using the voiceover, and I actually will have people say to me, well, you heard me say before, it helps me edit, right? As I'm reading it aloud, I go, oh, yeah, that's not
yeah.
really clear. The other thing is, people are saying, I like to hear your voice. And you can have an AI generation of it, but as a writer, you emphasize certain things that AI might miss the nuance. And
Mhm.
so I think it's a good chance for me to connect with people in a different way. And I've happily had people say, "Hey, I listened to it. I like hearing your voice. It's neat." So I like those two features. What I wish they could do, I wish I could do something more with the layouts. I don't know,
Mm.
like add colored text or something, or um, I didn't, just sometimes more of my personality. I was trying to do something the other day and I couldn't, and it was like a formatting thing. I wanted it either to indent it. The block quote is fine, but it's not me. I would indent it. I don't want to
Right.
indent
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, they're not there's a lot of people that wish that there was a little more formatting options. I mean, it's improved even in the 3 years that I've been on Substack, it's improved a lot. But, yeah, there's definitely still some things they could do that would make it more fun and inviting. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, if anyone wants to follow you, to reach you, what can you share your links with us and, before we close today?
Yeah, I'm have a domain, musingsofastoryteller.com. Musings is plural, so musingsofastoryteller.com, or on Substack, it's Diane Burley, spelled out. I think we're putting some links in the live on, and these are two chapters that were in the book, The Content Entrepreneur. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
about finding an audience and connecting with your audiences. So I think that those are really, and those are things that I remind myself. I read them and I go, yeah, I should make sure I'm doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will add those to the video when I send it out as the recording. So those will be there for sure. Everyone will get that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it was really great to have you here, and thanks so much for joining us today, Diane. And thank you everyone for joining in. So
Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
it was great. All right. We will talk to you again soon. Bye,
Perfect.
everybody. Thanks for joining
Bye.
us.